They've told you you're too quiet, too intense, just too much. You say something and the whole room goes quiet. Not because you're wrong, but because your thoughts travel down a road nobody else is on. You're the one who notices the tiny details, who questions the things everyone else just blindly accepts. And bit by bit, you feel people start to pull away. They're all laughing together at jokes that just fly right over your head because they feel empty. They're obsessed with the latest drama, the fleeting trends, all this surface-level noise. Meanwhile, you're stuck in your own head, wrestling with huge questions about life, meaning, and what it's all for. You try to fit in, you really do. You've perfected the social smile. You nod at all the right moments. But deep down, you feel like an alien, a stranger just wearing a human costume. And eventually, that little voice in your head starts to whisper, "Is something wrong with me?" But what if you're asking the wrong question? What if the problem isn't you at all? What if the world we live in simply isn't designed for people who think like you? The German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer had a pretty bleak but powerful idea about this. He believed that real, raw intelligence doesn't make you popular. It makes you isolated. He argued that the more deeply you see the world, the more alone you become. Why? Because most people don't crave truth. They crave comfort. And a mind that sees through the static is a direct threat to that comfort. This video is about the brutal truth Schopenhauer brought to light. We're going to explore why society seems to push away its most intelligent minds, and why that feeling of loneliness you carry might just be the ultimate proof of your brilliance. It starts when you're young. Picture it. You're in a classroom, surrounded by kids your own age, but you feel like you're on a totally different wavelength. It's not about feeling superior, it's just a disconnect. While everyone else is laughing without a care, your mind is off somewhere else, asking questions. Why do people say things they don't actually mean? Why does small talk feel like nails on a chalkboard? Why does it feel like you're always on the outside looking in, watching life happen instead of actually living it? This is your first taste of the silent burden that comes with a certain kind of intelligence. I'm not talking about the kind that gets you good grades or fancy awards. I'm talking about the kind that can't stop questioning, the kind that feels everything a little too deeply. It's the intelligence that sees the contradictions in what people say and do, that spots the subtle hypocrisies and finds it almost physically impossible to just go with the flow. As you get older, that gap only gets wider. You learn to hold back in conversations. You've figured out that raw honesty makes people deeply uncomfortable. You've learned that asking why one too many times completely kills the vibe. So, you adapt. You nod. You smile. You pretend. Because trying to make someone truly understand what's going on in your head feels like a battle you can never win. People often label you as arrogant, but the reality is, you're just exhausted. You're tired of trying to translate your thoughts into a language other people can handle. You're not cold. You've just learned from experience that your depth can scare people away. So you keep your biggest insights locked up. You censor your deepest questions, and you hide your pain where no one can see it. And here we arrive at the great paradox. Society claims to admire intelligence. We build monuments to geniuses, but in our day-to-day lives, we emotionally sideline the people who possess it in its rawest form. We worship the idea of genius in history books, but in the real world, the genuinely intelligent are often left on their own. Why does this happen? Because real intelligence doesn't just solve equations, it challenges the status quo. It sees through the illusions we build to make ourselves feel safe. It questions the traditions that others blindly follow, and that makes people incredibly nervous. You become too complex for simple, surface-level friendships. You're too analytical to enjoy the little things without taking them apart to see how they work. You're too aware of everything to ever truly relax. The emotional toll of this is crushing, but it's completely invisible to everyone else. You can be in a room packed with people and feel utterly alone. You ache for a connection that goes beyond the weather and weekend plans, for someone who doesn't just hear your words, but understands the meaning behind them. But that person rarely seems to show up. So you're left with that nagging question again. Is there something fundamentally broken about me? This is the unspoken tragedy. The world teaches you how to be successful, how to perform, how to check the boxes, but it never teaches you how to simply exist when your mind is wired differently. And so you become a master of disguise, a chameleon. You learn to blend in, to dumb yourself down, to know exactly when to shut up. You do it not because you want to, but because you have to for survival. Because every time you've dared to speak your unedited truth, you've paid a social price. But underneath that mask, the weight just keeps building. A quiet sadness, a desperate hunger for meaning, and that one persistent question: am I the only one who feels this way? You are not. In fact, that silent suffering you feel isn't a sign of weakness. It's the signal of a rare mind trying to find its way in a world that prefers the shallow end of the pool. And the philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer saw this exact pattern playing out centuries ago. He didn't just understand your pain, he predicted it. There's a hidden rule book that governs most of human society, and the first rule is simple. Don't think too much. Don't question the script. Don't stray from the well-trodden path. Just keep up with what's popular. Say the things that are safe to say. And for God's sake, agree with the loudest person in the room. This is what Schopenhauer was getting at when he talked about the herd. He saw that most people have a tendency to outsource their thinking, not because they're incapable, but because thinking for yourself is lonely and dangerous work. And this is precisely why the truly intelligent person is often feared. Not because they look down on others, but because they refuse to blindly follow the herd. The moment someone in a group starts asking, "But why?" swing, the whole group gets tense. When someone points out the contradictions, the little white lies, the traditions that make no logical sense, the group's defenses go up. It's not a rational response. It's a primal, psychological one. In every classroom, every office, every family gathering, there's a subtle, invisible pressure. Conform, or you will be cast out. The intelligent person, by their very nature, can't help but push against this pressure. Not because they're trying to be a rebel, but because their mind is driven by curiosity and a deep need for truth. But here's the uncomfortable reality. Thinking differently isn't celebrated in practice. It's treated like a virus. Because real intelligence doesn't just question facts. It questions comfort. It shatters illusions. It shines a bright, unforgiving light on all the things people are desperately trying to ignore. So when you walk into a room and say something that exposes the group's unspoken hypocrisy, when you pitch an idea that hasn't already been signed off on by popular opinion, when you challenge the broken system instead of just playing along, you don't get a round of applause. You get a label. You're weird. You're too intense. You're not a team player. Think about the modern workplace. We're flooded with corporate buzzwords about innovation and thinking outside the box. But in reality, The person who raises the uncomfortable truth in a meeting is often quietly sidelined. The employee who questions an inefficient but long-standing process is told to stop overthinking it. The one who doesn't participate in office gossip or perform fake positivity is branded as antisocial. It's the same in our social lives. Even on online platforms, where free thought is supposed to be the main event, the algorithms don't reward depth. They reward simplicity, repetition, and emotional outrage. Nuance gets buried. Complexity is punished. Deep, intelligent conversation is drowned out by the noise. So what happens to the truly intelligent person in a system like this? They learn to hide. They learn to make themselves smaller. They put on a mask just to get through the day. And eventually, society gets exactly what it wanted all along: silent brilliance. A genius locked away behind a wall of social anxiety. A world-changing potential buried under years of self-doubt. Wisdom that is never shared because it was never welcomed in the first place. This is the ultimate irony. The world screams that it wants intelligence, but only the convenient kind. The kind that plays by the rules. The kind that doesn't make anyone uncomfortable. The kind that fits neatly inside a pre-approved little box. But real intelligence is never neat. It's messy. It doesn't fit on a motivational poster. It doesn't care about what's trending. It doesn't flatter egos. It confronts them. And that is why the world pushes it away. To be truly intelligent is to be misunderstood. It's to be feared. It's to be alone in a room full of people nodding along to something you know, in your bones, is false. It's more than just rejection. It's a kind of social exile. Because once you can see through the game, you can't pretend to play it anymore. And when you stop playing, you no longer belong. That's the price you pay for nonconformity. And for those who refuse to betray their own minds, it's a price they pay in silence, every single day. But Schopenhauer believed this suffering wasn't meaningless. He saw intelligence not as a gift, but as a burden that only the strongest souls could carry. And those who carry it are destined to walk a lonelier path, but also a truer one. Arthur Schopenhauer was not your typical feel-good philosopher. He didn't sugarcoat reality or sell you false hope. He believed that life at its very core is defined by suffering, and that the more conscious and aware you become, the more intensely you feel that suffering. To most people, this sounds incredibly pessimistic. But to anyone who has lived in that quiet despair of thinking too much and feeling too deeply, it sounds like the truth. It sounds like someone finally gets it. Born in 1788, Schopenhauer grew up in a wealthy but emotionally barren home. He felt like an outsider from the very beginning, observing the world with a depth that made him feel more like a spectator than a participant. And his philosophy grew directly from this feeling of alienation. His most famous idea, and the one that gets to the heart of this, was this: a man can be himself only so long as he is alone. For Schopenhauer, intelligence leads to isolation, not as a choice, but as an inevitable consequence. The more you understand about life, the more disconnected you become from those who are content to live on its surface. He argued that most people are driven by what he called the will, a blind, irrational, and relentless force that lives in all of us. The will isn't logical. It doesn't care about truth or happiness. It just wants, endlessly and painfully. Most people, in his view, are completely ruled by this force. They chase money, pleasure, status, and validation, not because they've thought it through, but because they're trapped in a cycle of desire they can't even see. But the truly intelligent person, the thinker, the observer, begins to recognize this trap. They take a step back. they start to see the strings that pull everyone else. And that's where the real suffering kicks in. Because once you see the world as a frantic dance of illusions powered by unconscious craving, you can never unsee it. You can no longer laugh at the same shallow jokes. You can't participate in small talk that feels like a lie. You feel like a ghost at a party that never ends, wondering why no one else seems to notice the profound emptiness of it all. Schopenhauer put it perfectly. The more unintelligent a man is, the less mysterious existence seems to him. In other words, ignorance isn't just bliss. Ignorance is belonging. The moment you start asking the deeper questions about meaning, mortality, and morality, you lose your membership in the tribe. Not because the tribe hates you, but because they simply do not understand you. Your questions feel like a threat to their comfort. This is why Schopenhauer championed solitude. He didn't see it as loneliness, but as liberation. Great men are like eagles, he wrote, and build their nest on some lofty solitude. To him, intelligence wasn't a glamorous prize. It was a kind of curse that stripped away all your comforting illusions and forced you into a state of existential exile. And yet, he didn't want you to despair. He believed there was a higher way to live, through deep contemplation, through art, and through philosophy. By turning your suffering into insight and your alienation into wisdom. He was one of the few thinkers brave enough to say it out loud. The pain you feel from thinking too much is real. The disconnect you experience when you try to share your thoughts is valid. That gut feeling you have that something is deeply wrong with the world. You are not imagining it. And that's why his work still speaks so powerfully to anyone who has ever felt out of place. For Schopenhauer, suffering was simply the price you paid for clarity. And while the world might mock those who see too much, he whispers from across the centuries, "You're not broken. You're just awake." His philosophy wasn't just meant to fix your life. It was meant to help you endure it without having to lie to yourself. To face the darkness, not with fear, but with dignity. Because in the end, intelligence might isolate you from the crowd, but it also connects you to something far more permanent, to truth, to art, to beauty, and ultimately, to your own soul. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is a higher form of connection, one that no crowd can ever offer, and no rejection can ever take away. Loneliness is almost always seen as a social failure. But what if, for some people, it's the price you pay for a mind that works on a deeper level? Modern psychology is finally starting to catch up with what philosophers like Schopenhauer sensed centuries ago. High intelligence and high isolation often go hand in hand. Let's look at the science for a minute. A fascinating 2016 study in the British Journal of Psychology found that the more intelligent a person is, the less satisfaction they get from frequent socializing. For most people, hanging out with friends is a major happiness booster. But for highly intelligent individuals, too much social interaction can actually lead to frustration and a feeling of emptiness. Why? Because the conversations often feel like they're stuck in the shallow end. Their minds are craving depth, nuance, and big ideas, but they're getting gossip, repetition, and emotional noise. They might care deeply about people, but they struggle with the rituals of connection that society offers. This creates a painful condition known as cognitive loneliness. It's not about being physically alone. It's about being in a crowded room and feeling like you're the only one speaking your language. This is where the emotional paradox kicks in. On one hand, highly intelligent people are wired for introspection. They analyze, they reflect, they overthink. They can build entire universes inside their own minds that no one else ever gets to see. But on the other hand, they're still human. They still have that fundamental need for connection, intimacy, and resonance. They yearn for someone who doesn't just nod along, but who gets it. Someone who can hear what's not being said. And that is the psychological trap. The smarter you are, the smaller the pool of people who can truly understand the complexity of your inner world. This isn't arrogance. It's just emotional math. Psychologists have even suggested that our brains are, in a way, evolutionary misfits. We evolved to thrive in small, tight-knit tribes of about 150 people, where fitting in was the key to survival. But the highly intelligent mind of today processes information faster, thinks in abstractions, and instinctively challenges norms. It's no longer running on the original tribal software. The world simply hasn't caught up to your wiring, and that mismatch hurts. Because deep intelligence often comes with a heightened sensitivity to everything. Imagine your brain processing 10 thoughts in the time it takes someone else to process one. Imagine picking up on every micro-expression, every subtle shift in tone during a conversation. Imagine replaying one word someone said for hours, dissecting its every possible meaning. This isn't a superpower. It's an exhausting burden. It can easily lead to anxiety, depression, and burnout. Not because there's something wrong with you, but because your system is processing too much data from a world that isn't built for that level of input. Psychologist Kazimierz Dąbrowski called this overexcitability. He found that gifted individuals often have a heightened intensity in 5 areas: intellectual, emotional, imaginative, sensory, and even physical. Put simply, smart people often feel more, think more, and as a result, suffer more. And this intensity, while it's the very thing that fuels creativity and insight, also deepens the chasm between them and the rest of the world. But here is the hidden truth in all of this. That feeling of loneliness doesn't always mean something is missing from your life. Sometimes it means something is unmatched. A mind that sees through illusions. A heart that refuses to settle for shallow conversations. A soul that craves meaning more than it craves comfort. A person like that will always feel a little separate from the rest. Not because they've failed at being social, but because they are wired for something deeper, something rarer. So if you have ever felt this specific kind of loneliness, not just the absence of people, but the absence of resonance, it may not be a curse. It may be the quiet, persistent signal that you are one of the few who are not just alive, but truly awake. You might think that your intelligence would at least earn you some admiration, and on the surface it often does. But hiding just behind that admiration, there's often something much darker: envy. And envy has a nasty habit of turning respect into resentment. Most people will never admit this, not even to themselves, but in the small, everyday moments of life, intelligent people often face a subtle, constant pushback. Not because they're unkind or arrogant, but because their very presence unintentionally exposes a painful truth in others: their own insecurity. When you walk into a room and speak with clarity, with depth, or with an unshakable confidence in your own reasoning, some people won't hear your words. They'll hear a reflection of their own inadequacy. They'll feel outshined, small, or intellectually clumsy. That little sting of discomfort is their ego jumping into self-defense mode. The Dunning-Kruger effect plays a huge role here. It's a cognitive bias where people with low ability at a task overestimate their own ability. They literally don't know what they don't know. Now drop a truly intelligent person into that environment. Suddenly, that comfortable illusion of competence is shattered. They're confronted with their own limitations, and instead of learning, many will lash out. They'll call the intelligent person arrogant, cold, or a know-it-all. But the irony is, you never said any of that. Their ego heard it, because your intelligence didn't just challenge their idea, it challenged their identity. This has been the pattern throughout human history. Socrates was executed for corrupting the youth, but what he really did was expose the sloppy thinking of powerful men. Galileo was put under house arrest for suggesting the earth revolved around the sun, not because the science was wrong, but because the church's authority felt threatened. Alan Turing, the man who helped crack the Enigma code and win World War II, was chemically castrated and driven to suicide. These weren't just tragic misunderstandings. They were acts of egoic retaliation. Because when you introduce a new truth, you simultaneously expose the lies people have built their lives around. And most people would rather destroy you than rebuild themselves. So what do you do? What do you do when the very thing that makes you you also makes you alone? Arthur Schopenhauer didn't offer an easy fix. He offered a brutal yet profoundly liberating answer. Embrace solitude. Intellectual superiority, he wrote, is marked by a propensity for solitude. He saw it not as a punishment, but as the ultimate freedom. Because here's the truth. The crowd will rarely, if ever, understand the individual. And the more profound your thoughts are, the more likely they are to echo in an empty room. But for Schopenhauer, that silence wasn't emptiness. It was clarity. In a world that is terrified of being alone, we're taught to see solitude as a weakness. But Schopenhauer flipped the script. He argued that the person who can be alone and still feel whole is the strongest person of all. Because solitude is not the same as loneliness. Loneliness is the pain of craving connection and not finding it. Solitude is the joy of choosing peace over shallow company. It's not the absence of other people. It's the full presence of yourself. It is in solitude that you are finally free. Free to think without interruption. Free to feel without judgment. Free to create without compromise. It is in the quiet that great art, philosophy, and scientific breakthroughs are born. They are not the product of committees. They are forged in stillness. When you learn to embrace this, something incredible happens. When you no longer seek validation from the outside world, you become untouchable. Rejection loses its sting because you're no longer playing that game. You stop shrinking your thoughts to make other people comfortable, and suddenly, that solitude transforms from a prison into a sanctuary. A forge for your strength and a mirror for your own truth. This is the brilliant, brutal solution Schopenhauer offers. Don't beg the world to accept your depth. Let it reject you. Let it misunderstand you. Because that rejection is the very proof of your difference, not your failure. So if you are misunderstood, if you are left out, if you are labeled too intense, too analytical, or too different, Schopenhauer would say, good. It means you are no longer a prisoner of the herd. If you've ever felt like your thoughts are too heavy, your questions too deep, or your emotions too intense for the world around you, you are not broken. The pain you feel is not a flaw, it's a signal. A signal that you see what others don't, that you feel what others suppress. The journey for a soul like yours moves from confusion. Why don't I fit in? To clarity. Maybe I was never meant to. And finally, to power. And I don't need to. Somewhere on that path, loneliness stops being a wound and becomes your greatest strength. Schopenhauer wrote, Great men are like eagles and build their nest on some lofty solitude. Not because they are arrogant, but because they need the silence to see clearly. From that height, you are no longer lost in the noise. You are above it. So if society rejects you, let it. That rejection is not your failure. It is your confirmation. It's the proof that you are no longer willing to trade your authenticity for their approval. Let that be your validation. You're not lost. You're just ahead of your time. If you've made it this far, you're not just watching a video. You're searching for something real. And I want you to know that already sets you apart. Maybe you've always felt different, and maybe the world has made you question if that's a flaw. It's not. It's your clarity. Here at Cyphus, this is a space for those who think deeply, question everything, and never settle for surface-level answers. You are not alone in how you think. This community exists for you. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more deep dives into philosophy, psychology, and the human mind. Share this video with someone you know who might be walking this path alone. And if you've felt this kind of isolation, tell us your story in the comments. I read every single one. Let's continue to build a community for the minds that don't fit in, because we were never meant to.